What is up, everybody? I hope you are enjoying this episode of my man Adam Shell, and I wanted to take a second while I have your ear to let you know that next Thursday, October 17th from 7 to 9:30 p.m. EST, Breathe with Cannabis is back, and this month's theme is amazing. This month's theme is the Relationship Healing Edition. So whether or not you're having challenges in how you relate to yourself, your romantic partner, friendships, cannabis, anything in life, this workshop is going to be an amazing opportunity to come allow yourself to usher in your next level of evolution when it comes to your relationships, alongside our worldwide community of spiritual seekers just like you. So to find out more about the event and register, head down to the show notes for this episode, and I will see you all there. Now back to the show. Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. The world of cannabis genetics today looks much different than it did even just 5 years ago. With more and more breeders coming forth and more strain selection than ever, I find many people are confused on how to navigate this world and to be able to truly understand how to find high-quality genetics. Today's guests on the show are two men who are looking to create the new standard when it comes to unique genetics not seen on the mainstream cannabis market today. They each have an extensive background in the cannabis space and have also done and continue to do the work when it comes to ridding themselves of any distortions standing in the way from them being able to show up as their best selves and the highest service possible for their friends, family, clients, and the world at large. In this episode, we dive into each of their origin stories before doing a deep dive into the world of cannabis genetics today, how they came up with the idea for Goblin Seeds, their newest venture, and much, much more. So please, help me in welcoming my brothers, Joe, Colletta, and Patrick to the show. Joe and Patrick, my cosmic soul brothers, I am super excited to have you guys here with me. You know, as I mentioned in the intro for everyone listening, you know, we became connected a little while back. Joe, who was it that connected us? It was Dave McCusker. It was Dave McCusker that connected us, right? Shout out to Dave McCusker once again for being the homie. And as soon as he told me about what you guys were doing, I was like, yeah, I need to talk to you guys, because everything you're doing with Green Goblin genetics and seeds that we're going to get into and everything like that, you know, is just near and dear to my heart. You know, like in the world of cannabis today, there's a lot of different genetics, but a lot of them are trash. A lot of them are very similar. And, you know, what you guys are doing is just exponentially amazing to everything that I hold near and dear to my heart within the realm of cannabis and beyond. But before we get to all that juiciness, right, we're going to save that for a second. I want to ask you guys, you know, for both you guys, Joe and Patrick, you can go one after the other if you want. How did you guys first become interested in cannabis and psychedelics? We'll kind of lump them together. Was this something that you were always into, or was it something that happened later on in life? And how did that journey all start for you guys?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a wild experience for me, I would say. You know, part of my journey is that I was big into three things when I was a kid: drums, sports, but specifically it turned into hockey and working out, strangely enough. So I was like working out when I was like 5, 6, in the the living room with my mom with like soup cans and jazzercise. And that turned into, just like my own dropping into the depth of my body at a very young age. At 10, I think I asked for a squat rack, and I spent hours in the basement. I was a little kid. I'm still a little guy. And so like I figured at a young age, I love Arnold and Sylvester Stallone, all those guys. But I couldn't get the arms, and I wasn't going to get the height at that age. So I was like, I'll get the abs. So I started doing crazy ab exercises and actually ended up in retrospect understanding that I started doing breath practices at a very young age, which will lead into just a funny story after this. But what ended up happening is with hockey and growing up kind of like almost as an only child, my brother's 10 years older than me, my sister's 7 years older than me. I grew up a little bit quicker, and with sports especially, I would play with the older kids. Like that was my only choice. And so one of the funny things to do, I guess, when you're in like eighth grade is get a fifth grader high. So that was my first experience with cannabis at 10 years old and one of the kids in the neighborhood. And we had an incredible time. So like in my experience with other people's experiences where they don't feel it, something else happened, like I really had an elevated experience, but at that age, you don't know how to process it fully. You just know that it was fun. Right. And so that was my first experience. And then, come into eighth grade, I would say, was when we touched back into it again. And actually, I had my first LSD experience. All of those things being said, like the dropping into the body, finding these things at a young age because of the work that I had done with the body, and then ultimately having those psychedelic experiences at a really early time for sure, but supplementing it, let's say unconsciously with the physical practices that I was doing. And actually, flashback to AOL back in the day, those breath practices that I was doing, I found a pop-up that said like Indian man's secret to massive penis. And it was a pelvic floor exercise. So I started understanding then that what I was doing with the breath practices were pelvic floor exercises. I didn't know that. I was like, oh, I was already doing this. And so, still waiting for results to this day. But ultimately, what happened was, this crazy phenomenon of being in the body, dropping into it deeply, playing sports, being with older people. It opened me up to a lot of experiences at a very young age. But what I understood coming out of all this is that the psychedelics and the physicality were all leading me towards my spiritual path. And it was actually how I found my spiritual path. Having those psychedelic experiences at a very, very young age actually turned me off to having psychedelic experiences for a very long time after that. And so it wasn't until I was in my late 20s, like 28, 29, about 10 years ago, that I started really experimenting with microdosing. And that actually correlated the same time with my dropping into yoga, dropping into spiritual practices on a more formal level. And so, yeah, that really opened me up to see through, touching into Ram Dass and some of these other sources, like what was the value of them, connect back to what I was doing as a kid, see that, there was a reason that I am the way that I am. And I'm kind of always felt a little bit different, not in a bad way, but ultimately in a way where it was a challenge sometimes to view the world in the same way as other people, and not an unempathetic way, but in a way where it made me a little bit confused. Right. So feeling like I could connect with people, but still being a little bit different. And so a lot of these experiences, you just don't know that they're strange until you're out of the shit when you're a kid. So, yeah, the reality is, let me not run all over myself. Opening up very young led me into, a bolstering of, oh, there's really value here. And now I could make and piece together the different things that I had experienced along the way that maybe were a little bit fragmented and ultimately led to some challenges and despair in life, potentially, into, painting the full picture. And then finding out that the psychedelics actually opened me up into a space where I was finding out who I was. I was looking at things that, are really challenging to look at and going through the process of those. And with that led me into really looking at what my career was. And this was the most recent development, and finding out that what I really wanted to do was be moving more towards the medicine that I found really was beneficial for my body, and brought me into the cannabis seed space with a longtime friend. So there's a lot in there. I don't like that story that much, Ryan.
Dude, it's an amazing story, bro. And there's so many similarities between our journeys. And I'll let you share in a second, Patrick, about yours, because I'm really curious to hear it. But for me, again, when you're a kid, you don't really know, right? You just kind of find things that are fun for you, and you kind of go more into them because they are continuing to be fun. And for me, when I was 13, I was in school and I started realizing I was kind of tall at that point. I'm 6'5" now, but I wasn't fully 6'5" then. So I realized when I got to middle school, there are bigger kids in school, right? And so I was like, I need to start working out. So I remember my brother bought me 2 25-pound dumbbells for Christmas one year. And so I just started using those and doing push-ups. And I started to realize early on, like, oh, I get good attention when I have muscles. Okay, cool. Like, this is a good positive reinforcement. So I kept going with that and, got deeper into it and whatnot. But, what's really cool about both of our journeys is that, I always say that for psychedelics and cannabis, I include into that. Before you get into them, it really helps to have a solid foundation of things that you love, like, rituals, things of that nature, a strong spiritual foundation, and exercise is definitely a strong spiritual foundation for me, taking care of yourself. And then, of course, yoga and meditation and breath work and everything came later for me. It's really cool that you tapped into it at a young age, with breath work. And, really hilarious to comment on the huge penis thing. They definitely knew how to market, to people. It's like, all right, that'll get a guy's attention.
Just sitting there, unsuspectingly on Messenger back in the day, and boom, pop up. AOL. Yeah. Really dating myself. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Shout out to AIM, dude. My name on AOL was Ancient Sex Ritual. So, I can only imagine what people will think of that. But, it's really funny to think back to these times and, be able to see how all of those things, as strange as they may have been, all worked to allow us to end up who we are today, So really cool to hear, Joe. And yeah. Patrick, I'd love to hear from you, man, and hear like how you first got interested in cannabis, psychedelics, and everything in that realm.
Yeah, similar story to both of y'all, starting at a young age. It's a little fuzzy of when I first got into, my first experience. But first thing that I really remember is when I was like 15 and starting to grow cannabis with my younger brother. And we, at the same time, I was interested in psychedelics and stuff like that. And, I did it early on. And I remember an experience where I tripped very, very heavily on LSD. And, I was talking to Joe about it a little bit ago. I was so young, I didn't really have a sense of self, and when you go into those sort of journeys and the stuff, you create, you destroy your ego and things like that. So it's jarring for when you're young like that. But the benefit for that, for me, was it gave me a realization that cannabis was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And it sort of enforced that I was doing that. And the thing that was always difficult for me was to sort of reconcile that in my mind, because I found out at such a young age, this is what I wanted to do. But growing up in the South, it was like, this is not something that you want to do. This is a taboo sort of subject. And so it created this conflict inside myself of understanding that I had had this opened up to me through psychedelic experiences, through experiences with cannabis, but it was almost a taboo experience, which created this conflict inside of me. And being such a young person, you can't really rationalize that. So you sort of cover up that pain, and it's translated through destructive means and other things like that. But once you, if you can, come out of it, you can look back on it and see that you had your ego destroyed and stripped from you, and you saw what you wanted to do. And for me, it was great because I went to university, which was, to study cannabis, University of Mississippi, which was the only legal cannabis field in the country. I went to study that, found out that I couldn't go on the fields until I was in graduate school. So I said, okay, cool. I'll just grow in the woods. I'll grow in my closet. I'll do all of this and continue doing what I was doing before I came to the university, and then learn as much as I can. And because I had that ego stripped away of, oh, you can't do this, you can't work on the fields until you're a graduate student. Cool. Well, I can still go to the library. I can do that. And having that ego stripped away of like all of these can'ts when you're young, like, you can't do this, you can't do this. And then having that experience so young of being like, I can do anything. Like, I'm connected with everybody. My entire future is written by me. And having that experience was very empowering at a young age. And it made it difficult to relate to a lot of people until I got into my later 20s, because people were trying to create their identity. And I felt like I'd found mine when I was 15. So that was just sort of thing. And for me, it's been a consistent thing. That's what, from the time I was 15, I was like, I'm going to grow cannabis. I'm going to be in the cannabis space. And now, the age that I am now, many years later, I'm still doing it because it's what I love. It's pretty much the only sort of truth that I've found in just like, even going through hard times. If I've been growing cannabis, been in this space, but I just am always connected with the plant, like going into the field and like putting my feet and watering plants barefoot and stepping out in the ground And seeing these plants is almost a psychedelic experience in itself, because you realize the power that these things hold, whether it's a cannabis plant, an opium plant, bark from a tree, a frog, whatever it is, they hold this sort of reverence that you don't understand and you can't really see, but you see it from afar. And if you're truly connected, then you realize that this is the truth to breaking back and getting everything that you want. You just have to be willing to accept that medicine in a specific time, because it's not the right time for everybody. And so when I think of my first experience with these things, it's hard to pinpoint one, because I think of just the transition that it took me into and the realization and remembering. I specifically remember that trip that I had because it was very, very strong. I was 15 years old, and it was the hardest psychedelic experience I've ever had. I think it's to this point. I mean, I took like a 20 strip, and it was just too much. I mean, I was a kid thinking, I took a 10 strip. I'm like, I don't feel this after an hour. Let me do another 10 strip.
Yeah.
And then, it's just, it was jarring. It was very jarring. I do remember that experience, but for cannabis, it's so, I remember hiding it around, smoking with my friends inside at specific times, but it's not really that I think of. It's more of when I realized that this is what I wanted to do in my life. And no matter what challenges were faced, because I went to the university, and then I was like, okay, I can't continue to do this in the South and grow and do this without jeopardizing my freedom. So I was like, California, go to California then. And that's what I did. And luckily, I've been able to move back to the South with the laws for hemp and things like that, which has transitioned me in 2018 to come back to the South to do hemp, and being able to do seed cultivation in California and back in the Southeast has been great. But that's my first experiences with cannabis, or realizing this is what the rest of my life is made up of, I guess.
Wow. What is up, family? I wanted to take a second while you're tuning in to tell you about an amazing new product I recently began using. Now, you guys know I do ads very rarely, and my promise to you is that anything I speak about is something I personally have found value in using regularly. Well, recently, I came across a company called Brain Supreme, who sells microdoses of mushrooms mixed with adaptogens, nootropics, and other additions as well. And even though I've microdosed off and on for years, I have never felt results like these. In only 2 weeks, I'm sleeping better, I have far less mind chatter, my ability to perform has exponentially improved, and best of all, the sense of inner peace I've been feeling is like nothing I've ever experienced in microdosing before. Right now, you can get 15% off of any of their products when you use code SPRAGUE15 at checkout. And to find out more about them and grab some for yourself, head down to the show notes for this episode and begin your journey into microdosing today. Now back to the show. Dude, what an amazing story, both you guys. I mean, so many similarities between both your journeys and mine. I grew my first cannabis plant when I was 18, completely by accident. I mean, not fully by accident, but I didn't really think anything was going to happen. I had some bag seed. My cousin Jackie, who's 10 years older than me, when I got into cannabis when I was 16, I found that I really enjoyed it because I never liked alcohol. I was trying to convince myself that I could like alcohol, but, it just never really worked for me. I'd look around at people seemingly having fun, and I'd be like, I just feel sick and gross, And then my favorite part of the night would be like when everyone, like all the stoners were like, let's smoke a blunt. And then I usually puke because I had been drinking. So I realized early on, like, oh, if I smoke and I don't drink, I don't puke. So then I was like, well, I can't drink anymore because I really like smoking. And so shout out to cannabis for, stopping that, potential challenge of drinking right in its tracks when I was very young. But I remember that when I was 16, my brother, who's 20 years older than me, he apparently had trouble finding stuff. And so my mom and I were always really close, my dad and I too, but my mom knew everything. Like I would tell her everything. She'd buy me beers every once in a while, whatever. I was a huge Pantera fan, so I'd see him drinking Rolling Rock and I'd try to drink Rolling Rock and whatever. So she'd always know pretty much everything. So I guess she had told my brother's wife that I could find stuff. And so my brother, I remember hitting me up and being like, hey, I have a friend that is looking for anything. Could you find something? And I'm like, oh, maybe I could, connect you to this person or whatever. Well, it was probably about 6 months before he was like, this is for me, right? And I'm like, yeah, I kind of figured. And so then he was like, you got to meet your cousin Jackie. And I had met Jackie, like, I remember at a 3rd of July party my dad had thrown when I was like 11 or whatever. And I remembered, he had red hair, and that's all I really remembered, a lot of tattoos. So I had reached out to him, and he introduced me to like the real game of cannabis. I had been on like mids and kind bud, KB back in the day. And he brought over, what was known at that time to be exotics or headies, and I remember, he started kind of training me where like, he'd be like, hey, like, what do your friends have? Like, what do they have access to? And so I'd grab something and be like, dude, it's really good. Let's come smoke a blunt. And then he'd come over and be like, dude, this is kind bud, dude. And I'm like, I thought it was exotics. And he's like, no, dude. Like, so he started teaching me a lot about it. So around this time, I ended up with a bunch of seeds, and he was like, you should try growing one. And my parents' backyard was a swamp. And so I just threw a bunch of seeds out there, didn't even know what I was looking for in terms of a sprout. But he came over about a week later, and we're out there looking around, and he's like, hey, you got one. And I'm like, that's a cannabis plant? He's like, yeah. I did nothing to this thing, dude. It just grew straight up. It ended up being female by the luck of the gods. And I ended up getting to harvest about, I don't know, probably 3 ounces from it, which at that time was like, I was a millionaire basically,
Oh, yeah.
And so after that, I just was hooked, and, again, I won't tell the whole story, but then later on, my dad and I started growing together and whatnot once he found out and, things like that. But it's just amazing to look back to that because again, when I grew that first plant, it was exactly when I knew as well, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I want to be in the world of cannabis. And just like you, Patrick, there was no available options. I remember being at a party, a Halloween party. So I don't know, probably 15 years ago, 13, something like that. We were playing beer pong. And it wasn't the kind where you actually drink the cups. It was just like water cups or whatever, because I didn't like drinking anymore. So I was just playing beer pong with a buddy of mine that I'd grown up with. And it started to get a little competitive, and he knew I didn't drink and he was the beer pong guy. And I started beating him. And so we started getting, pretty frustrated. And so I started, throwing shit back at him, and he was like, well, what are you going to do when you have to grow up and get a real job? Like, what are you going to do when cannabis, like, when you have to grow up and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, let's just see what happens. And I remember it was about probably 8 years ago when I got into the industry. And, of course, now all my education, panned out and everything because I'd gone to cannabis school and very similar to you, Patrick, like all these things that I didn't really know if we're going to pan out, but I was just really interested in it. And I remember about 8 years ago, he hit me up and he's like, hey, man, how do I get into the industry? And it was just that moment of like, of course I helped him. I didn't be like, hey, remember that time? But it was kind of like that feeling in me of like, thank God I listened to myself. Thank God this medicine helped me see what my path was and helped me live a life where, yeah, I had to be a pirate for a little while, but it was really fucking fun. And, I imagine you guys can identify with this because you guys grew up together, or have known each other for a long time. The people that you break laws with, you bond very deep with. And even if now it's not a law to break to grow cannabis or whatever, or to connect with it, you stay bonded with those people. Like those are still my best friends ever. And nowadays, I'm not breaking laws anymore, but the people that are all living a life beat at their own drum, those are my ride or dies, because even if I'm a coach, someone else is building their own, physical business infrastructure or whatever, we're all doing something that doesn't have a paved path to it. And it seems like that's a connection that you guys have as well. Would you agree with that? Like, this idea of like, always wanting to do something different than the mainstream kind of laid out for us, all the can'ts, as Patrick said.
Patrick, I'll let you go. I got a little bit different story there for sure, but Patrick, I think maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, 100% for me. I mean, I've been friends with Joe for a long time. And so, he tried to march to the beat of the drum for a long time. And that's not who he was. And I think that he was able to find himself in letting go of those bonds. But I can't speak to that. That's more Joe's story specifically. But for me, Joe and I have always been close. And as RIP Young Dolph, he always says, if you trapped together, you're my motherfucking brother. So that's just sort of the way that I sort of outlook on life as well.
Pirate code.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and just because that wasn't necessary, and again, it's like I maybe took a little bit of a different path in a professional sense for a while, and some other things which honestly were in conflict with who I was. What Patrick mentioned is not that I was some lawless person, but I mean, in high school, we knew each other in high school and before, and we were some wild boys. It was interesting. And so, we made it out, but it was also, then I tried, and I really tried to figure it out and suck it up and go through what felt like a bit of a torturous life each day. as I went to college and studied something that I didn't really see value in, which was, I mean, I see value in business, but the way that we learn and the way that the education system was, it's not to teach you how to learn, it's to shove stuff down your throat. And, that's not who I am. I'm a creative thinker and really somebody who lives in a nonlinear way. So it didn't sit right with me, if you will. But, how I kind of got here is my real kind of opening. So in high school, I took a bit of a different route. I was playing high level sports. We were winning national championships for, it's funny to say now, roller hockey, which was so much fun. Roller hockey, not like we were winning soccer and like basketball or some badass but anyways, it was awesome. We had a killer time, but I thought I was going that route. I never got past 6'5", 6.5", so I wasn't going to the NHL. That just wasn't happening. So, what I went though, what I saw as an opportunity was like, okay, I'm big into the fitness. I want to do the business. And like my dad was an executive and I got lost in something that was interesting to me, but ultimately not my path. And so when I was 18, after high school and just getting ready to start this whole path, I got in a massive car wreck. And actually the car flipped 4 times. I didn't have a seatbelt on. My buddy was driving. And we landed back on the wheels, and we actually got pulled over by a cop who gave my buddy a DUI. I got checked out. They're like, nothing's wrong with you. The car flipped 4 times without a seatbelt on. There was certainly something wrong with me. I was built like a brick shit house, but that doesn't mean the spine didn't take the hit. So there was deep pain there, and just an ability to soldier on as a young guy, but the body keeps the score, right? So ultimately, what I found was that although I wasn't using it in a conscious way, I immediately, and there were some other incidents with police and drunken incidents, getting tackled and tased and like the shit kicked out of you while you don't know what's happening, your body really gets jacked up. So, I mean, cannabis, the mother really embraced me there. And so I didn't realize what I was doing. But again, you want to talk about a save from another epidemic. I mean, we lived in a place, and a lot of people, I know Boston experienced this for sure, but the opioid epidemic. And thank God I had cannabis. I found that my body did not agree with opioids, but we lost a lot of friends to the opioid epidemic when we were kids. But thankfully I had cannabis to help with the pain, and with, taking me out of the temptation of those spots. Through that process, I still did the corporate thing and had another hockey injury that it turned things up and flipped up the degradation of my spine to the point that then I really had to go into yogic spaces, breath practice spaces, and look at the cannabis use for what it really was, because there was no way to ignore pain in my life anymore. And I realized what it was doing for me at that point, let's say at 28, where I all of a sudden understood the relief, the elasticity, and also when I was using it with the proper breaks and giving myself space and really allowing for it to be medicine, the mental elasticity that started to and it felt like it had like neurogenesis type effects where it actually helped me come back to life with my brain, rather than what people think of as the misconception of it causing a brain fog. So it really played, like I went down a totally different path. I really stepped into a corporate space. I was working for the largest German software company in the world for a long time, for 11 years. And, while that offered me, and I did, Patrick can probably attest to this, I marched so deeply to the beat of my own drum and who I am that I carved out a really strange career at this software company where I didn't work in an office for the past 9 years and traveled the world. And it was pretty badass. I would say A++ on performance, but it was still killing me. And so, at a certain point, Patrick and I had been exploring for years, and I had many failed businesses on the side. We had tried, we're like, what can we do? And finally it came together with the seed company. And I said, this is the thing. And I felt into it for a little bit, but the moment that my soul in this year in June, end of June, beginning of July, soul just said it's time. And believe me, ego Joe is you could have planned better, buddy. No shit, you wanted less stress, all these things, but it was fucking time, man. And so I finally just took the leap, and although of course there's life happening, I've never felt more correct about a decision in my life. So fail or succeed, it doesn't matter. Like, we're doing it. So that's how I got here.
Dude, so amazing to hear that, man, because very similar to you, I had many quote unquote failed businesses, which I don't think of as failures at all. And I imagine for you, you don't see them that way, right? They were learning lessons, and also they weren't the right business for you, which is why they didn't pan out, right? But the most important thing, and for anyone listening too, maybe you feel like Joe felt 10 years ago, right? I got all these failed businesses. What am I going to do? And it's like, no, you have a lot of opportunities that you actually did the only thing that's going to get you forward in life, which is you took a risk, to go out on your own, to pave your own path, even to get a promotion to the regular job, right? It's a risk, and you have to be willing to put yourself out there to see what happens from it. And even if you get the no or the quote unquote failure, you learn from that experience, and it shapes you more into who you are and who you're continuing to become, because we're in a constant cyclical process of becoming, and it's amazing to hear that, because I was very similar as well when it came to the jobs that I did have. I had like 3 jobs in my life, and I'll tell you what they all were. The first one was Staples, and the smell of paper still haunts me in my dreams. That was the most boring fucking job you can ever think of. Like there's nothing more boring than selling paper and fucking pens, right? So the second job I had was a wild left turn. I worked at a porn store for a year and a half, because at that point I had realized, like, I just don't want to do anything that other people want to do. So I had needed a new bong because the cops had busted the fort we had made. In the process of busting it, they had come over. It was in my neighbor's backyard, and we had a big sleepover at my house. And basically, like, there was cops doing road work in front of my parents' house, and my neighbors are like family to me. So our yards are connected through a gate. It's called the mudslide gate, because my mom and their mom used to drink mudslides all the time together. Now it's White Russians, but our dads built that when we were young. But we were all walking with stuff up our shirts, like bongs and whatnot, out there a bunch. And so this cop decided to just come back and see what the hell was going on, which is totally illegal, but we didn't know our rights at that time. So I had to go back to my house to grab something halfway there, right? Like, I realized I forgot, I don't know, something, a drink or whatever. So I went back to the house to grab it. So I'm walking back out. I'm not really paying attention. And I just look down at the fort. It's probably like, I don't know, 50, 60 feet in front of me. And I see someone at the door in all black. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? Because it's like, it's like nice out, and this person's wearing like slacks and whatnot. And I'm like, who is that? And I'm looking, and they're clearly like looking, they're turned around, they're looking at someone. And then I get a little bit closer. I'm like, oh, that's a cop. I'm like, oh shit. So I like tiptoe back. He doesn't see me. I run back to my house, and I tell my mom, I'm like, hey, don't be mad. She's like, why? And I'm like, there's a cop at the fort. She's like, oh my God. So my dad comes home. He goes out there to talk to the cop. And to my dad's credit, he pretends to be very upset. He's like, I had no idea this was happening. But to make a show of it, he went back there and started breaking a bunch of shit. And one of the things he broke was my bong. So he didn't know it was my bong. That was still when my dad didn't really know I was doing it, but he kind of knew I was doing it. So I had to go get a new bong. And the only place to get a bong was the porn store. So I go up there, and they have this sign, now hiring. And so I'm with my buddy, and I'm like, dude, that'd be hilarious. So I fill out an application, and the next day they fucking call me. So I ended up working there for a year and a half. Very interesting experience in my life. And then the third job was a dispensary. And that was the last job I'm ever going to work for someone else. I made that commitment to myself. So it's just amazing to see, even though you had to work that corporate job or you went that path, you still got to make it your own, And I think for a lot of people, maybe they hear this conversation and they're like, oh my God, is entrepreneurship for me? Maybe, or maybe it's just finding a way to make, something aligned to your vision work for you. There are many ways to do it, so long as you can go to bed feeling like, yeah, I'm proud of myself and I'm on the right path, So
Yeah.
it's really cool to think about that. Yeah.
I love that, Ryan. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things too. And it's one of the things that I feel more called to bring attention to. It's like, not everybody has to go and open their own business. Like, if you feel like your corporate job is suffocating you, maybe you think about something else. I mean, one of the things that I've realized for me in my spiritual path is I'm definitely not here to be a coach. Like, I don't want to be a spiritual coach in the mainstream sense of it. And I don't want to be, a life coach for people. And so then, if you're in the spiritual realm, especially where I met our boy, David McCusker, shout out. Shout out to Fit for Service. There's a lot of people that are in the spiritual world there. And I felt that it was a great experience to be able to navigate that group of people and that walk of life while still doing the corporate thing, because my service isn't actually what I do in the world first. My service is, can I connect to who I truly am? And when I know who I truly am, I know I'm God. When I know I'm not God as in the only God, I'm part of the same essence that is source and creator. And when I look out into the world, I know that all of the world is of the same essence as source and creator. And when I can recognize that, I recognize the kingdom. By my recognition, I give off a vibration. I know that we're getting into our woo-woo shit now, but it's blessing the world, and I get to bless everybody around me, whether they agree with it or not. But it's a vibrational thing, and this is a real energetic thing, and that's what brings service into the world without having to do anything. And then once we get to that point where we're making that our regular expression, and it's work, and it's not perfect, but then our expression in action becomes something else. So, we can go through a corporate job, and if we really are able, like, we feel like we're serving through that job in a way that doesn't hurt the world, and we love the people we work with, and that brings good, and we feel good, then that might be what you want to do. It was just there's a personal calling that's like, there's something that feels different about what I'm supposed to put in the world than that. And maybe it's about having conversations about how I stopped doing it. And who knows, maybe I have to go back to a corporation at some point. But that's all a choice, and it doesn't need to be made right now. I don't think the one thing that I really wanted to get from all of this is just, where do I find happiness in it? And so it was the move to get out. Also, Patrick, what was it? It was Love Shack was the sex shop / smoke shop that was over by our house. It was a real interesting place because that was the only place you could get any paraphernalia from like many years over by our place. Sex shop.
Yeah, and shout out to Atlanta's Hydroponic. It was the only place you could buy grow equipment in Atlanta at the time. So yeah, but I mean, the corporate thing, the sex shops and stuff. It made me think of you in Amsterdam. Like, you were working a corporate job, and you're able to visit me when I'm taking my vacation in Amsterdam in the wintertime, because that's something that I like to do. I love the sex industry. I'm from Atlanta. I love strip clubs. So like, it's like a bar scene to me. Like, that's just sort of the vibe that I like. And Joe, I said, hey, me and my girl are going to Amsterdam. You going to be around? He was going and doing spiritual work, over there. And he's like, yeah, I got some time to, blow some steam off and get aligned with my more ravenous side. And that's, that's the balance that Joe has always had. That's been able to keep me and him connected, is he has this drive to better himself, but he also has a drive to, get down to that ravenous side and be true to himself of like, I'm doing corporate, but, I can do my work from Amsterdam for a week, and sort of vibe with it and roll with it. And those are the, like you said earlier, the people that sort of march to the beat of their own drum are the people that you keep around you. And that's sort of the same sort of energy of Joe has been able to keep his spiritual side, keep his ravenous side, keep his corporate side, and doing all of these things and navigate it, and finding that something in his life didn't work, so he was going to strip it. But he also sees the value in keeping it, which is, what you see with true, I hate to say age, but that's what happens when you get older.
Thank you for the kind words, Patrick. Yeah,
is to see a better perception on life, and see the value in everything, and not understanding that you don't need to just kick anything away, and that absolutes aren't real. And that's really what it comes down to, is that absolutes don't exist. And when you start living in absolutes, you create conflict. And that's just sort of a driven thing that has kept us in constant communication moving forward, is, those sort of things. And when you start to feel yourself get in those directions, to sort of level yourself up. And cannabis helps me do that personally.
Yeah. Oh, 100%, man. It's really funny you say that too, because, at the end of the day, like, for me personally, I'm not going to say this is the objective answer, because there is no objective reality, but for me, the middle way is the way, right? Like, and I think that's what can happen when you get really into, say, spirituality. You don't let that ravenous side out, and even people like Buddha and Jesus, if they were real people, right? Who knows? I believe they were. But, again, like, even they were saying, like, hey, you don't have to quit alcohol or quit, anything, because to quit it makes it more real, right? Now, if you have a ridiculous out of balance relationship and you're on one side of the absolute, you may need to have that counter swing to the other side of absolute from like addiction to abstinence. But the goal is always to find somewhere in the middle, because that's where true freedom occurs. Freedom doesn't come from I need it all the time, or I can never use it because I'm terrified to ever use it. It comes from like, hey, I'm going to Dubai. Whatever. All right, I guess I just won't use it for 7 days or whatever. Or if I happen to find it out there, one of my buddies, Brooks, always says, how you know if you're a true stoner, cannabis finds you, and that's a real thing, I've been in places where you're definitely not supposed to utilize cannabis. And I've surrendered to it. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to try to find any. I'm not going to get myself in any hot water, especially in foreign countries, especially Central American countries, right? But again, at the end of the day, sometimes it just finds you and you're like, all right, well, I believe this is spirit working through me, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things. And something I'd love to ask you, Patrick, is at what point did you know you wanted to start a genetic company, like a seed company? Was that something you guys talked about together, or was that something that kind of came out like did you guys talk about it and it was like, oh, I had never thought of that before, let's do that? Or was it something you had already tossed around, and when Joe kind of got out of his corporate life and was like, hey, let's do something together, was it something that came out at that point? I'm just so curious to hear how Green Goblin became a thing, dude, because for everyone listening, I'll give a little context first. I know he said it in the intro, but what Joe and Patrick are doing is next level. I mean, just like the ability of them to preserve very specific genetics and make very unique genetics in breeding is something that I don't really see a lot of, Like I love gelato, for instance. I love do-si-do. I love those strains, but like everything these days is just like a cross of that, And so being able to look at these different things and have that variety, which variety is the spice of life, is so important. So I'm always curious to hear how people that ended up creating a business together originally started that journey.
Yeah, well, I'll take the lead on this, Joe, if you're good with that, and tell you. So I've been doing genetics for a long time. Been sourcing it from places all over the world. Have friends and family that served overseas that were able to get me some things from countries, be able to get seeds and things. And that's what I've always been interested in, is seeds. So, I've been doing that for a long time. And what I was doing before is we were selling our seeds to people. And then they would, before Joe and I got into this, so I would go to places, Amsterdam, for example. I try and spend a month every winter. He'd go there and just unwind because it's the only off season. He talked about like traveling. Traveling is very limited for me because it's like off the sun in the season. So it's like you have the little bit of time in the winter off. And, so I'd go to Amsterdam, source genetics over there and things like that. And get a strain catalog going. And I've done that for a long time. And so I did breeding, when I came back. Was doing it, as a hobby, then came back and did it with CBD breeding, CBG breeding, hemp breeding down here in the South, and continued doing THC breeding in California with some operations that I had out over there. And, I've just been breeding for a long time. But what I was doing is selling to websites that would basically sell my seeds and then do it under their company or whatever they wanted, and they would sell them, and then I'd get a cut from them. It was like a 60 66 33 60 40 cut for pretty much. They do all the work, I create the seeds, they do all the marketing, do all that. And then when we were in Amsterdam last year, I was doing again seeds, and I was continuing to sell, and I was like, this is just not really practical for me. I just feel like I'm sort of the middleman that's like doing all of this, and it's just sort of going into the ether, and I'm not really controlling it from the beginning to the end. I'm just controlling the beginning. And so I was like, talk to Joe, and I was like, hey, when we were in Amsterdam, like, we got to figure out something to work together. Seeds are what I'm trying to do. I want to create an intentional community to, do regenerative farming and teach people about no-till farming, being negative carbon emissions, because one of the largest carbon emissions is from farming, and people don't realize that. So like when I came to the Southeast and I started doing industrial hemp farming of growing, hundreds of acres of hemp, try to teach people about not doing, no-till and then stopping fumigation and being like, okay, you can't spray, you can't fumigate with chlorpicrin and Telon and like these very harmful things that kill the fungus inside there. So my goal was like to change an impact on things and being able to do that and with farming. So Joe and I saw eye to eye on that, and I have so many seeds. And so in January, I decided I wasn't going to sell to those websites anymore. I was just going to start from scratch over again and create a company and do that from the beginning up. And that's when Joe got into it with me. It was more of like May. We sort of got serious about it. And we're just, like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to bring this to market and bring quality genetics. It's vertically integrated, and we can market it towards, people that have intentions of what they're trying to do, with the intention of keeping that middle of the road and not being in excess and not being in drought, and just having that sort of contentness and not, trying to be a money grab. Because in the cannabis business, we talked about MJ Biz, and we're going to MJ Biz this year, and we're going to try to, network and meet people, but meet people with intentions that are good, and meet people with the intention of, I'm trying to be in the frequency of love and the frequency of abundance and the frequency of, the middle road, that's what we want. And that's what we're trying to bring through. And versus me and sending that to a bunch of different websites that are pushing genetics out that they pick and cherry pick, because they're like, hey, I only want these gelato crosses. I'm like, I stopped crossing with gelatos because a lot of the clones that I got that are gelato crosses have HPLV, which is a big problem in the cannabis business. So I was like, I'm just not going to breed with that sort of stuff. And I have like landrace stuff that I'm not trying to cross contaminate. And that's where I care about, the genetics, and be like, this is something that's stable, when you're talking about, NL1s or, sour diesels or GG4s or Kim cookies or any one of these varieties that are landrace to new age to old age. I try and keep them around, and then also taking stuff out of the new breeding catalog, because there's always new stuff that's coming around. It's just hard to follow the waves, and I think that's what people have gone away from, or people have done, is going towards the wave and trying to follow what the consumer wants versus what, feels good and what feels right. And that's where Joe and I connected on that, is we see the vision in that, of not trying to chase that, of trying to just chase what we feel is the right way, what we feel are good breeding practices, what we feel are good, versus just throwing a bunch of plants in a room and scattering it up, hoping that all the plants are clean, you're not passing on viruses, you're doing all that stuff. And that's just what the intention I want, because you work with some people and it's like, hey, I need you to breed with these. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have to pass. Or if you're like, I need like auto flowers, for example. I have some really good friends that do amazing work with auto flowers. I do not do work with auto flowers, because I did CBG auto flowers and I had so many issues with consistent cannabinoid profiles. And so it was just like, I'm going to stay out of this. Like it's a little bit something that I don't want to get into. I've done feminized, and I'm comfortable doing feminized seeds, and I'm comfortable doing regular, but I prefer regular seeds. And the reason I prefer regular seeds is when you do feminized, you're changing that plant chemically. And something that I don't like to do, but I have done it and I will continue to do it, is change the plant sex. But for a breeder like me, I like male female seeds, and that's why they're more valuable to me, is because it's a true Mendel's law of segregation. Like you see the different squares, and you see the different expressions that you can get, and you want that, because cannabis is not something that stays consistent, and something that you don't want to be consistent. Because if everybody's going to be breeding these candies, like candies, I grow some, but I don't really like them, because they're like what a grower would throw away. Like they don't put off really good yields. They don't do well unless you got, under lighting. They they're not gonna, the spacing's weird on the buds. And so like that's not, and then gelatos grow great. That's why growers love them. They put on the weight, things like that. But lemon cherry gelato doesn't really, unless you've got underlighting, because it's like it would have been one of the throwaways. But it's a very popular strain right now, and that's good that someone kept it. And I'm glad that they did, because it introduced something to the market that people really liked. But at the same time, the market shouldn't tell you that all you need to find now are candies. You need to go back to the old breeding of the NL1s, the hazes, the skunks, all of the ones that were from Amsterdam, who was doing most of the breeding in the 90s up into the early 2000s. Like one of the best plants that I got was this variety called Ice. And so, it's a very, very good variety that I grew, and it was amazing. And there was nothing like it. It was a great breeding for us, and we did really good breeding projects with it. But it's something people don't talk about is those one-offs that came from Amsterdam. People talk about the Chem Dog that came off of a seed in the Grateful Dead, and from someone selling a bag in the Grateful Dead and doing that. Nobody talks about these small guys that were bringing these seeds from Amsterdam and growing this fire. People were like, Northern Lights, it's nothing like the Northern Lights I used to get. Yeah, that's because you were getting it from this one-off grower that got some seeds from Amsterdam that was growing this phenotype of Northern Lights that blew your fucking socks off, because it didn't have this consistent phenotype. You got one of those pundit squares, you got one of those, Mendel's law of segregation. You're going to have different phenotypes, different expressions. That's why I like male female types, because when I'm doing female feminized plants, it's all one. I'm trying to be consistent. I'm trying to get it to be McDonald's. So every single time you pop a seed, it's the same. That's not the type of vibe that I'm trying to live personally.
Yeah. It's one of the things I do love about and what brought us together on Patrick's viewpoint too. It's like, you can hear some of like how his viewpoints preserve genetics, how they actually do work towards finding the things that are going to provide the best effects. And so that speaks to his experience providing like medical cannabis and medical concentrates. He's done some really cool things in that space. But also one of the things that Patrick and I do together is we want to embrace new technology. Like there's absolute value in what we would call like traditional and preservation of growing practices. You could even call, regenerative agriculture, like this preservative type of mindset when it comes to growing. But also, what do we do with like the other technology that you could introduce? Part of what we're doing as well is like introducing frequency, 963 hertz into the scenario is what we've been growing with, and also with the seeds and storage, been playing it to them as well, which is the God tone. So it's had some really beautiful effects, and Patrick has some other technology within the growing space that he uses. And one of the things I'm invested in right now and will bring to the market at a certain point is light and frequency based pest control as well. So experimenting with that and how we can actually live catch bugs and reintroduce them into the environment, and then live catch them and then reintroduce them, preserving the terpene profiles or enhancing them, etc. So there's a lot of stuff that brought us together on that front. But you hear, and I think it's pretty evident there's just an effort to preserve the best genetics, but also like we want to provide them in a way that makes them accessible.
Yeah, 100%. This is the hill I die on, guys. This is exactly what I am all about, is like, hey, I'm not against having, new strains or candies or anything, but let's stop kind of being maximists about things, right? Like, let's stop this whole oh, this is what's really big right now, so just focus so heavy on that, because you end up losing a lot of the genetics that were popular before that, because everyone prioritizes, let's say, candy or gas or whatever. And for me, one of the best parts of cannabis and life in general is the variety. I say all the time, variety is the spice of life, which is a saying I got from Tony Horton in P90X. So shout out to Tony Horton. But, again, he said a lot of good things in that P90X program. But,
it's a great program at 2 a.m.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, exactly, bro. And, it's so funny, man, because, for me, some of my favorite strains of all time still to this day are like Blue Dream, Green Crack, the original Northern Lights, or at least what I could get from, Greenhouse Seeds or whoever I could get it from through the internet. But, again, like I just heard this guy. I'm sure you guys have heard of First Smoke of the Day. Those guys that do that
Of course,
podcast,
yeah.
pretty cool
Yeah,
podcast.
definitely.
And there was just
Great
a guy
guy.
from there was just a guy from Amsterdam on there. I forget who he was. You guys might know who he was, but he was talking exactly about this, like literally verbatim. This conversation is exactly what he was talking about. He was saying like part of the challenge is over here in America, everyone's like allowing the consumer to guide the way, right? And what we know about the consumer is overall, the consumer is uneducated. I know that from working at a dispensary. People know two things when they walk into a dispensary: what's your highest percent and what looks the prettiest. That's really what most people base their decision off of. You'll get every once in a while, you'll get someone that comes in that's like, hey, I have a very specific thing I'm looking for. What would help with that? And then whatever you recommend, they're going to go with. But for the most part, most people think they know a lot, but they actually don't know anything. Yeah. And so the ability to change their mind is very challenging. And so rather than trying to tell them about this kind of stuff, what I found is that one of the best things you can do is just give them something, have them try it. And when they're like, dude, this must be like 30%, right? You're like, no, it's actually 14, and they're like, what? And then you're like, okay, so can you see that maybe, just maybe, there's more to the picture here than just what's the highest percent or what does the flower look like, And I think for me, one of the best things in being a grower is being able to select what I want from breeders like yourselves that are prioritizing things that are in my values. And one of the other things we connected on was the fact that you guys are utilizing frequency healing and things that could be considered quote unquote woo woo in the cannabis world. Most growers in the cannabis world, when I mention biogeometry or whatever, they kind of roll their eyes. But, again, when you understand that everything is sound and vibration, and you understand that plants, just like human beings and just like animals as well, have a biofield, and that biofield is just a collection of frequencies. And depending on how many EMFs, radio waves, or whatever are also going through that biofield, is the degree to which they can have a lot of confusion in their biofield and therefore lead to all sorts of issues down the line. So if you can utilize practices like biogeometry, frequency healing, electroculture, whatever it is, to be able to strengthen that plant's biofield, well, the positive reinforcement you get as a gift in return is that plant either yielding more or creating very unique terpene profiles, very unique, colorings, and all these different things that, in my experience, you just don't get when you're growing in a regular, salt grow with, gelato genetics and things like that. Again, not to knock anyone's grow styles. Like, again, I think, once again, variety is the spice of life. Just like you, Patrick, I'm very big on regenerative stuff, but I've messed around with salts in the past and whatnot. What I've found in my time growing is that when you allow nature to do what nature does best, and you just act as a steward, understanding I'm not trying to overwhelm or conquer nature, but all I'm trying to do is just see what the nature needs and be able to provide it to that, either, bed or pot or, land or whatever. When you can do that, everything just works even better. That's what I found. It's pretty amazing, Yeah. What's the thought, or what a thought that, nature would know how to be nature.
Yeah,
today's
exactly.
world, that's kind of a conspiracy theory,
Well, I think there's benefits in both, and that's really what it comes down to, is the middle of the road. I think that you should definitely use all of these regenerative practices, living soil, no-till policies. Try and limit your carbon emissions, and salts. Limit your salts. You shouldn't do that, but the land has been ripped up pretty hard. So to be able to do that as a farmer, to put those living organisms back in, is a hard sell. And, it's a lot easier for them to pay a couple $100 an acre to be able to put that in, versus spending a couple $1,000s per acre because you're losing money on the acreage because you're not growing anything, because you're just trying to keep those fields in fallow. And, I worked with a guy down in South Georgia, amazing dude. Worked with him in CBD, does cattle, and he does free grazing. And, all of the cows are grass-fed, grass-finished, and it's the best beef you'll ever have. And his soil is amazing, and it's great organic soil, and it's really amazing quality beef, amazing quality soil. But, all of his neighbors don't do that because it's a lot cheaper to do other stuff. And he's been a good shepherd of changing those ways. And, we hoped with hemp we'd be able to change those ways slowly, because you can put those mycos, you can put that stuff back in. You can teach people to just, hey, maybe don't fumigate. I know that weeds suck, and they really suck. But the fumigation is a lot worse, and this is why, because they've never had anybody explain that to them. And I think people are really hard on the farmers. They're really hard on the organic people. I think it's this sort of battle between the two that I just can't get behind either side, because I think it's just middle of the road, which goes back to my sort of belief on that. But yeah, I mean, I use salts as well as organics, living soil. It's I think it's beneficial. It just depends on what you're doing.
Yeah, 100%. It almost seems like the organic people and the other people, let's just call them other people, should get together and smoke a fucking joint, right? Like, isn't that the fucking thing that cannabis is best at doing? Like, you know, I remember from, I don't know, probably like 5 years ago, there was a video that went around and went viral, and it was a rabbi, a priest, and a rapper, I believe, and they all smoked a joint together. And so beforehand, they're very cordial with each other. They weren't arguing, but they were pretty steadfast in their belief systems. Like, yeah, you have yours, and that's great, you have yours, but I have mine over here. And then it shows them smoke a joint together, and by the end, they're like, you know, I think we're all kind of talking about the same thing, and they high five, you know, and it's like, that's what the world needs now more than ever. And I feel like a lot of the industry has forgotten the roots of what cannabis culture is, which is meant to bring people together, not put people at odds with each other. You know, I think at the end of the day, everyone's looking to do the best they can with the information they have available. And like you're saying, Patrick, right? Like, I think a lot of the organic people that want to, you know, try to persuade the non-organic people to be organic are doing so in a way that doesn't really make sense. They're like, yeah, well, you're going to have to do more work and all this stuff. And it's like, that's not really going to meet them where they're at, because their values are different, right? They're trying to keep operational costs low and things of that nature. So I think if you can link it in the way of like, hey, what if you could do this and keep operational costs very low and all these things that matter to them, I think they'll be more apt to be like, okay, maybe I'm not fully sold, but I'll at least, you know, I'll look into what you're selling here, you know, and see it. And I think that's what's amazing about having you guys doing what you're doing, is that you have feet in both of these worlds, and you have the keys to be able to bring these people together, which once again is what true cannabis culture is all about, at least for me.
Yep, 100%. I think you bring up, you know, it's an interesting point. And I think as more and more science is brought forth, right, it already exists that biogeometry affects yields and affects. It's called biodynamic farming. Like it's been around for hundreds of years. They don't put a horn in the ground because it's just fun to dig shit into the ground. Like there's purpose behind these things, and it's based on shape. There's actual research and studies going on in Southeast Asia for frequency and it creating higher yields for the plants. And so, yeah, like I guess we lost Patrick for a moment, but we will, so Patrick mentions when I saw him in Amsterdam, and for me, that was, I believe I was coming from an ashram, and I was stopping in Amsterdam to see him before I went to Ibiza for a bufo session. So yeah, it was a really very interesting time period. But you know what we'd been looking for things, and we talk about the God tone, and that's actually where it came from, and my experience with bufo and the energy that actually brings to the table. And in growing with that, we found exactly what you found, Ryan, which is that it didn't matter the THC content. It brought people into this beautiful confrontation with themselves, and ultimately into a place where, you know, regardless of what the confrontation is viewed as for them, whether it's confrontation with substance and why they're using it, or it's confrontation with some undone thing inside ourselves that we need to take care of. And if we don't, then it turns into anxiety and paranoia and all the whatever it might be. It really is the thing that brings you into deeper unity and into peace with the self. And so behind Goblin Seeds, and part of the thing, you know, I got back from, so I went to Ibiza, then I went to Bali, then I was back in Amsterdam, and then I was back in California. And I was like, all right, well, what do I really want? And this was before we even knew we were going to do the seed company, but this is what the seed company actually came together to support. It was sitting in, you know, Rancho Santa Fe and near San Diego, which is just ridiculously expensive place. I'm like, it would be fantastic if I had an organic farm. It's very clear that I'm not going to do it here because I don't have $7 million to drop on like 2 acres of land. That's when I moved back to Georgia. I bought a little farm, 7.5 acres up in the mountains. It's almost up to Tennessee, which is a very interesting cannabis scene at the moment. And so we started there, right? And we have a little place where we're building an embodiment space. So I have a large warehouse that we're building out: gym, hot pool, cold pool, sauna, all the different things, yoga space. We'll have on the back end a place for our little ecstatic dances. Eventually, this will become an agro-tourism spot. And what we're doing is we will get, we're working towards getting our hemp license up there so we can have a showcase of whether it's hemp or landrace variety apples, pawpaws, native fruits, high-end, potentially high-end products that we can put out into the world, all just to bring some type of attention to the farm and get people to put their hands back into the soil. And if we can do that through cannabis courses, that's what we're there to do. But we're also doing it through the food to ultimately get people back into a place where they're contributing. And we see that as what Patrick mentioned before, the communities, intentional communities, and a place to build around is how do we get people who are interested first in growing anything, and we can connect with our cannabis growers. From there, how do we then get the word to say, hey, you already understand this. How do we get word out to you, to other people, to get us to come into community, to learn to put our fingers back into the soil? That gets us all to create something that creates those intentional communities where people know that they're contributing to something that empowers a group of people to be able to make the right decision for themselves there. And then we're all working towards, with Fit for Service, we've got a lot of people with intentional communities and farms. And it's a really fantastic place. And the vision that I have is seeing that we'll provide an infrastructure for these in communities who can make the right decision for themselves. It's the beautiful part about dropping into connection with the land and connection with yourself, is you know what to do for yourself. And so when we allow for that, then each community and then the local area gets to make the right decisions for that area. Geography matters, and the people in those areas matter. And then we start to span out from there. And then you could see and conceptualize how potentially COVID could have been handled in a much different way, and where we would be able to make unified global decisions and not be afraid of a one leader government nightmare that I don't want to get into. But yeah, so this is the intention behind Green Goblin Seeds, is how do we help to build this space where we're actually bringing people together and doing that in community where we get to have fun and learn how to embody in that space.
Dude, so freaking cool. I've already said it, but I'll say it again. This is the hill I die on. This is everything I'm about. Decentralization as a whole is, for me, the answer. Because again, for instance, I always pull out this example, but it's one that, I think a lot of us understand. Instagram shadow bans me for talking about a natural plant that somehow they've convinced, or, they're convinced is not able to be had on certain imaginary lines, but other imaginary lines is fine. So as a result, I get shadow banned for that. Well, for me, that's unacceptable. At the end of the day, why are platforms like Instagram having to go along with these ridiculously stupid things? Because they fear persecution, right? And all these things, because they're centralized. So imagine if you had 1,000 Instagrams, right? Or relative programs similar to Instagram, and one of them started saying, hey, you can't talk about natural plants. Well, that one would go out of business, Yeah. And so the problem is there's just not enough of these communities yet, of these, decentralized food avenues where you can get food. Like I buy all my food through the Amish now and all this kind of stuff. And to me, it's the answer, because if you have a lot of these things happening, if one has an issue one year with a harvest or something, maybe they get PM or something happens. Well, it's okay. You have a bunch of other ones, right? And I think that's part of the challenge that a lot of dispensaries go through, is that there's so many fucking rules that go into, the industry, especially here in Boston. There's some places that are a lot, better. But, again, if people lose one harvest, their entire business could go under. And so talk about, why people are choosing to fumigate or use these very damaging things. It's like because their whole livelihood depends on it, And so there's obviously a lot, in there that we can decouple. And, of course, it's never as easy as just saying that's the answer and that'll be it, right? We got to work to create these things. But, what I know full well and good is that you guys are really doing amazing work. And I'm so excited to be behind what you guys are doing and, to feature you guys on the show. I can't believe we've already gone an hour. I'm going to have to get you guys back on for part 2, 3, and beyond. But I want to make sure I give you guys ample opportunity to tell people where they can connect with both of you individually, if you're reachable individually. I know, Patrick, you're out in the woods most of the time, so you might not have internet, but where they can find Green Goblin Seeds. Is the website up yet? And anything that they can, follow to keep up to date with all the amazing things you guys got going on. Because if I know you guys well enough already, I know that, Green Goblin Seeds is going to continue to expand and expand and expand into things that maybe aren't even alive in you right now, but are going to continue to become alive at the right time and in the right place. So where can people go to find you and stay connected and, go on this journey with you guys of Green Goblin Seeds and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. So first place you'll find us, and by the time this releases, we should have our e-com up and everything should be fully running. So ggseed.com. And then we're getting on the socials. Instagram's up and running right now. So we'll be playing with any way we can not to get shadow banned. I believe it's just at Green Goblin or Green Goblin Seeds, I believe is the tag there.
So, well, this has been amazing, guys. I have one last question that I like to ask everyone, right? Let's say someone listens to this episode and they're really excited to look at cannabis and psychedelics and how they may apply to their own life, right? Maybe they're a new user, etc. What is the one piece of advice that each of you would give? I'll let you guys both go, so you can each give your own answer if you want to, that would allow them to use the proper discernment in understanding of whether or not psychedelics or cannabis are right for them at this moment in their lives. What's the one piece of advice you would give them?
So the thing that comes to me, and Ryan, we touched on this before, I think this is the most important thing, honestly, to make any clear decision. But for me, it's always taking care of the container first. Make sure that the body is fully strong. Make sure that I'm hydrated correctly, that I've taken care of the 4 doctors. Shout out to Paul Check.
Oh, yeah.
So, take care of the baseline first. Then that will allow for a different opening when it comes to psychedelics. And if the container isn't strong, the psychedelic can blow you away. I mean, it's the mind and the body are inextricably linked. And so that's the most baseline level type of advice. The next step up is really just not everybody needs it. Everybody needs a confrontation. Everybody needs a reckoning with our own creations, if you will. If it feels like life is stale, if it feels like you need a shakeup, it might be worth, at the very least, understanding what cannabis, what microdosing can do. Committing to a full dose of anything is an absolute necessity. But I'd say that staleness, if it feels like there's a bit of a hard, stony patina hanging on you, then the microdosing and going gently into these spaces where you can explore yourself more will start to loosen it and allow for that exploration to happen in a way that the body can handle it and the mind can handle it without coming undone. Then from there, if you can handle it, then you feel that staleness and you're ready to take a big leap, there can be massive benefits from psychedelic use. And if you haven't done it before, do it with real practitioners, do real research. Don't just listen to your buddy on Instagram or some dude that hits you up in a back alley and is like, bro, we had a sick ayahuasca circle up in the building. Nah, don't. Just don't. So that's where I land with that.
Dude, perfect. Well, guys, we'll wrap it there. It's so amazing to have you guys on here. I can't wait to have you guys again on here. And also, I can't wait to check out some of your genetics myself. Guys, I'm going to field test these. I know they're already going to be fucking amazing. I'm so excited to get them. And guys, wherever you are in the world, I hope you are having the best day ever. Make sure you go follow Green Goblin Seeds on Instagram. Make sure you check out ggseed.com. We'll link it all in the show notes for you guys. Keep it in one place, easy peasy. But until next time, everybody, may the source be with you and have the best day ever. Much love.